Have you ever discovered that everything you believed about your life was a lie? That the people you trusted most were actually your worst enemies? And that the person you were taught to fear was the only one who ever truly loved you? My name is Viola Brennan, or at least that's what I thought my name was for 32 years. I'm sitting here today to tell you about the moment my entire world shattered with 5 simple words from a man I'd been told to fear my entire life. Words that would expose the most devastating family betrayal you could imagine, and lead to a revenge so perfectly orchestrated that it destroyed 3 lives in a single evening. But this story doesn't start with revenge. It starts with a photograph hidden in an attic, a DNA test that arrived mysteriously in my mailbox, and the slow, horrifying realization that the monsters in my life weren't hiding under my bed or across the street. They were sitting at my dinner table every single night for 32 years. I work as an accountant in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. You know the type of job: decent salary, fluorescent lights, and a coffee machine that sounds like it's dying every time someone uses it. For 8 years, I've been the responsible one in my family, the invisible middle child who does everything and gets nothing. My older brother Wesley is 35, and the golden child who can do no wrong despite failing at 6 different business ventures, all funded by our parents. My younger sister Nadia decided that finding herself required visiting every country in Europe on our parents' dime, while I drove our mother to doctor's appointments and picked up prescriptions. My parents, Jose and Constantia Brennan, were pillars of our community. My father worked in insurance for 30 years. My mother volunteered at church and always brought the best casserole to neighborhood potlucks. From the outside, we looked perfect. From the inside, I always felt like something was fundamentally wrong. There was this guarded look in my mother's eyes whenever she looked at me, almost like fear. I remember being 7 years old when Theodore Ashford moved into the house across the street. A quiet man with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes who kept to himself and never bothered anyone. But the moment he arrived, my parents sat me down for a very serious conversation. They told me Theodore Ashford was dangerous, that he had done terrible things, and that I should never speak to him or go near his house. If he ever approached me, I was to run home immediately. My father's face was stern. My mother's hands were shaking. I was 7. I believed them completely. For 25 years, I crossed to the other side of the street whenever I passed his house. I avoided eye contact. I warned friends who came to visit. The monster across the street became part of my childhood mythology, like the boogeyman hiding under my bed. 3 months ago, everything started to unravel. I was doing my parents' grocery shopping because at 32 years old, I'm still the one who actually shows up for this family. I arrived at their house with 4 bags of groceries, including the specific brand of oatmeal my father insists on. My mother wasn't in the kitchen, which was unusual. I heard voices upstairs coming from my father's office, a room I was never really allowed to enter as a child. Through the slightly open door, I heard my mother's voice, tight and anxious, then Wesley's voice, calm and reassuring. They were talking about the house, about transferring the deed, about making sure everything was in Wesley's name before something happened. And then my mother said something that stopped me cold. "We need to do it now before Viola starts asking questions." Before Viola starts asking questions. What questions? What were they hiding? I quietly went back downstairs, finished putting away the groceries, and told my mother I had to leave early. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning those words over in my mind, thinking about all the little things that never added up. Why I looked nothing like my siblings. Why my baby photos were kept in a separate album in the attic instead of displayed with Wesley's and Nadia's. Why my mother always changed the subject when I asked about my birth story. I'm an accountant. I notice when numbers don't add up. And suddenly, I realized the numbers of my life had never added up at all. A week later, I volunteered to help clean out the attic. I found a photograph in an old shoebox buried under Christmas decorations. It was a Polaroid, faded but clear. My mother, young and beautiful, standing next to a man, holding hands. She was looking at him with an expression I had never seen her direct at my father, and she was visibly pregnant. The man in the photo was Theodore Ashford, the monster across the street. I turned the photo over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 2 words and a date: Our Miracle, and a date that was exactly 9 months before my birthday. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I shoved the photo in my pocket and climbed down from the attic. When my mother asked if I found anything interesting, I smiled and said, "Just old Christmas ornaments." I learned that smile from her, the one that hides everything. 3 days later, I confronted my mother. I placed the photograph on the kitchen counter next to her cutting board and watched the color drain from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She tried to explain, stumbled over words, contradicted herself, changed her story 3 times in 2 minutes. When I asked her one simple question, "Is Theodore Ashford my biological father?" panic turned to anger. My mother's face hardened into something ugly. She told me I was being ridiculous, that I was stirring up old dirt that should stay buried. She told me that if I continued down this path, I would be cut out of this family completely. Cut out like I was ever really included in the first place. That night, my father called. His voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. He told me Theodore Ashford was a dangerous man who had stalked my mother years ago, and that bringing up his name was causing her genuine distress. When I asked questions about the details, he hung up on me. The next few weeks were a masterclass in family gaslighting. Wesley called to suggest I might be having a breakdown from work stress. Nadia sent a long text from Europe about how family is family, and sometimes we have to let go of the past. Even my fiancé Jace started acting strange, telling me I was becoming obsessed with conspiracy theories and embarrassing everyone. But I started doing research. I pulled my own birth certificate from county records. The original had been amended when I was 2 years old. The original father's name was blacked out, replaced with Jose Brennan. I searched for any public records about Theodore Ashford. If he was really a dangerous stalker, there should be something, a restraining order, an arrest record, something. What I found was the opposite. Theodore Ashford was a retired literature professor with 30 years of service, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. He volunteered at the public library twice a week. Then I received something in the mail that changed everything. No return address, my name, handwritten in careful script. Inside was a DNA testing kit and a single note. "The truth is waiting when you're ready." I took the test that night and sent it off to the laboratory. The results came back on a Thursday. They were very clear, very scientific, very devastating. Jose and Constantia Brennan were not my biological parents. The test also showed a DNA match to an unknown male relative, a very close match, parent-child close. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I found Theodore's faculty page on the college's archived website. His student reviews called him brilliant, kind, patient. I found the original police report from my mother's harassment complaint. She claimed Theodore had been following her and trying to contact her through letters. Theodore denied all charges. The case was dismissed when my mother suddenly withdrew her complaint. Then I found something that made me sick to my stomach. Theodore Ashford had created a trust fund in 1993 for a minor child named Viola Ashford. The initial deposit was $50,000 from his late mother's estate. Over the years, he had added to it. By the time I turned 18, it should have contained over $180,000. Should have? Because when I searched for the current status of that trust, I found that it had been accessed and drained. The listed guardian who authorized the withdrawals was Constantia Brennan. My mother had stolen my inheritance from my real father and never said a word. I dug into my parents' finances and found they had been claiming me as a disabled, dependent on their taxes for over a decade. They had been collecting Social Security benefits in my name, benefits I had never seen. They had opened credit cards using my Social Security number. My family hadn't just lied to me about who I was. They had been financially exploiting me since I was a child. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, clarifying anger. They had stolen my father. They had stolen my money. They had stolen my identity. And they had done it while making me feel like I was the one who didn't belong. I made a decision. I would approach Theodore, but not as the suspicious daughter demanding answers. I would go to him as a confused young woman who had stumbled onto some information, playing the naive role my family expected from me. The next Saturday morning, I put on my most innocent-looking outfit and walked across the street to Theodore Ashford's house. My heart was pounding as I rang the doorbell. When the door opened, Theodore stood there, older than in my mother's photograph, but still recognizable. He was wearing a cardigan, for goodness sake. The man looked like he should be hosting a public television show about butterflies. He stared at me for a long moment, and then I watched recognition flood his face, followed by grief, followed by hope. He said my name, not a question, a statement. Viola. And then, before I could begin my rehearsed story, he said the words that shattered everything. I'm your real father, Viola, and I've been waiting 25 years for you to knock on this door. Over the next 3 hours, he told me everything. He and my mother had met at a bookstore in 1991. She was engaged to Jose, but unhappy. Their relationship lasted 4 months, then Constantia discovered she was pregnant. Theodore wanted to marry her and raise the child together, but Constantia chose security over love. Jose had money, family connections, a future that looked impressive on paper. She broke off the relationship immediately and married Jose 3 weeks later. She never told him the baby wasn't his. When I was born, Theodore tried to be part of my life. He sent letters asking for photos, asking to see me. He opened the trust fund so I would be provided for. Constantia's response was to file a harassment complaint. Theodore was given a choice: disappear from my life completely or fight for his parental rights and lose everything. He made the choice he thought was best for me. He stayed away. But when the house across the street went up for sale 5 years later, Theodore bought it. Not to stalk, but just to be close, just to watch his daughter grow up even if she never knew who he was. All those years, he had been there. Every birthday, every milestone, he watched from his window. He kept a journal of everything he saw. He never stopped loving a daughter who had been taught to fear him. When I asked about the trust fund, his face darkened. Constantia had forged documents, claimed I was mentally incapacitated, and drained every penny for herself. The money had been spent on Wesley's failed businesses and Nadia's European adventures. Theodore had tried to pursue legal action, but the lawyers told him it would cost more than he would ever recover. And the DNA kit? Theodore admitted he had sent it. He'd been carrying it in his desk drawer for 3 years, waiting for any sign that I was questioning things. When he saw me find the photograph in the attic through my old bedroom window, he knew I was ready. We made a plan that day, not a revenge plan, but a justice plan. Theodore had documentation of the trust fund theft. I had evidence of identity fraud, tax evasion, and Social Security scams. Together, we had enough to bring down the entire house of cards my parents had built. Over the next month, I became the perfect daughter. I apologized to my mother, told her I had been confused and stressed. I helped with groceries, attended family dinners, laughed at my father's jokes, all while secretly meeting with Theodore every week, photographing documents when my parents weren't looking, building a case that would destroy everything they had built on my suffering. I found the final piece of evidence 2 weeks before we planned to take action. In my mother's filing cabinet was a folder labeled VA Settlement, Viola Ashford, my real name. Inside was everything. The original trust fund documents, Theodore's letters that Constantia claimed never existed, legal papers showing she had declared me mentally incompetent, bank statements showing exactly where every dollar had gone. At the bottom was a letter from Theodore dated 15 years ago, begging Constantia to let him see me just once, promising he would disappear forever if she would just let him say goodbye. Her response was written in the margin in her own handwriting. Never. She's mine now. You'll never get her back. That's when I decided on the perfect venue for justice. I suggested to my mother that we throw a big anniversary party for her and my father's 32nd wedding anniversary. She was thrilled, always wanting a celebration where everyone could see how perfect her life was. I told her I wanted to plan the whole thing as a gift to make up for my recent behavior. The planning took 3 weeks. I coordinated with caterers and musicians, sent invitations to every person who mattered in my parents' social circle, neighbors, church friends, my father's former colleagues, extended family. Theodore and I met every evening, refining our strategy. He had hired a forensic accountant to document the trust fund theft. I had compiled evidence of the identity fraud. Together, we had enough for criminal charges. But charges alone weren't enough. I wanted everyone to see who my mother really was, wanted that reputation she had spent 32 years building destroyed, along with everything else. The night of the party, the backyard looked beautiful, white tents, string lights, flowers everywhere. By 7 o'clock, the yard was full of 50 people, all dressed in their Sunday best, ready to toast 32 years of marital bliss. Wesley arrived with his wife Sandra. Nadia had flown in from Portugal, paid for by me secretly. And there was Jace, looking handsome in a new suit, already deep in conversation with Wesley about investment opportunities. At 9 o'clock, the speeches began. Wesley delivered a generic toast about wonderful parents. Nadia talked about gratitude and family bonds. Then it was my turn. I walked to the small stage we had set up, heart pounding but hands steady. I began by thanking everyone for coming, talking about how meaningful family was, how important it was to know where you came from, how truth always matters even when it's difficult. Then I said I had a special gift for my parents, a video documenting their journey as a family. The first image on the large screen was my mother's photograph with Theodore, young Constantia, pregnant, holding hands with a man who was not her husband. The murmuring started immediately. The next images were documents. The original birth certificate listing Theodore as my father, the amended certificate with Jose's name, legal papers showing my mother had declared me mentally incompetent to access a trust fund I never knew existed. My mother was standing now, her face the color of chalk. I continued narrating, explaining about the trust fund, $180,000 stolen from a child by the woman supposed to protect her. I explained about the Social Security fraud, the identity theft, the decades of financial exploitation. I told them about Theodore Ashford, the man across the street they had all been warned about, who was actually my father kept from his daughter through lies and manipulation. Then I played the recording I had made 3 days earlier with a hidden microphone, my mother's voice clear as day, laughing about how easy it had been to drain Theodore's trust fund. My father's voice joking that the fool had basically funded their retirement. Wesley's voice explaining how he had forged documents to make it look legal. The backyard was completely silent. I looked at my mother crying ugly tears, at my father staring at the ground, at Wesley already backing toward the gate. Then I delivered my final gift, red and blue lights appearing at the end of the driveway. 2 police cars. Right on schedule. The arrests happened quickly. Jose Brennan was arrested for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Constantia faced the same charges plus additional counts for the trust fund theft. Wesley, who tried to slip away during chaos, was caught at the garden gate and arrested for his role in forging documents. 50 guests watched as the perfect family was led away in handcuffs. My mother's church friends horrified, my father's colleagues stunned, neighbors who had believed for 25 years that Theodore was the monster, suddenly realizing they had been wrong about everything. Jace appeared at my side, trying to figure out how to play this situation to his advantage. He reached for my hand, started saying how sorry he was. I pulled away and really looked at him. Maybe for the first time. I saw someone who had sided with my family when I needed him most, someone more interested in my father's investment than my well-being. I took off my engagement ring and placed it in his hand, then walked away toward Theodore, who was waiting respectfully at a distance. When I reached him, I collapsed against his shoulder, and he held me like a father holds his child, like he had wanted to hold me for 25 years. The legal process took 6 months. Jose pled guilty to reduced charges and received 3 years probation plus complete forfeiture of his pension. Constantia fought every charge but was convicted on 12 counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in state prison. Wesley received 18 months in prison and 3 years probation, also losing his business license. The civil case resulted in a judgment of $340,000, the original trust fund plus interest and damages. My parents didn't have that cash, having spent it all, but they did have the house on Maple Ridge Drive that they had secretly transferred to Wesley's name. The court found the transfer fraudulent, seized the house, and sold it at auction. After legal fees, I received $280,000. I used the money to pay off student loans I'd taken because my parents said they couldn't afford to help while secretly draining my trust fund. I put some into emergency savings and used the rest for a down payment on a house, a small house with 3 bedrooms and a nice yard, right next door to Theodore Ashford. I quit my accounting job and started my own bookkeeping business. Theodore and I had dinner together every Sunday. He would cook his mother's recipes. I would bring dessert from the Italian bakery. We talked about books, history, all the years we had missed. He showed me photos of my grandmother Eleanor, who had died when I was 5, wanting desperately to meet me but forbidden by Constantia. Nadia and I are rebuilding our relationship slowly. She moved back from Europe, started working as a translator. She visits once a month. We don't talk about our parents much. There's too much pain still. But we talk about sister things, future things. She's the only Brennan I kept. One morning, about a year after the trial, Theodore was sitting on his porch with a cardboard box. Inside were 25 birthday cards, one for every year since he had moved across the street. Each card was still sealed, my name written in his careful handwriting. I opened them one by one. Each card documented milestones he had observed from a distance. My 7th birthday described watching me learn to ride a bicycle. My 16th mentioned a boy who picked me up for my first date, Theodore wanting to be the protective father but watching from behind curtains instead. Every card showed 25 years of loving me from afar, celebrating silently from his window. The last card was different. It wasn't sealed, wasn't old. Theodore had written it just days before. It said, "I never stopped believing you would find your way home. And now that you're here, I want you to know something I've waited your whole life to tell you. I am proud of you, not for what you did to them, but for who you became despite them. You are strong and kind and brave. You are everything I hoped you would be. You are my daughter, and I love you." I cried reading that card, real tears, ugly tears, the kind that come when something inside you finally breaks open and heals at the same time. Theodore held my hand while I cried. He didn't say anything. Some things are beyond words. I looked across the street at the house where I had grown up. The new family had painted the shutters blue, left bicycles on the lawn, hung a tire swing from the oak tree, something my parents never allowed because it would ruin the aesthetic. The house looked happy now in a way it never had when I lived there. I thought about Constantia in her prison cell, probably writing letters I would never read. About Jose doing community service, certainly complaining. About Wesley rebuilding his reputation, spinning stories about being manipulated. They would move on eventually, find ways to justify what they had done, convince themselves they were the real victims. People like them always do. But I was done thinking about them. I had spent 32 years in their orbit, defining myself by their approval, measuring my worth by their attention. Now I had something better. I wasn't alone anymore. The neighbors think Theodore and I are quite the pair, the retired professor and the accountant, living side by side, having Sunday dinners on the porch. I overheard one wondering if we were eccentric intellectuals, dangerous criminals, both of us. Watch out for the woman with spreadsheets and the man with poetry books. We might audit your taxes and then discuss Whitman. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from finally understanding that the people who were supposed to love you never did, and the person you were taught to fear was the only one who ever truly cared. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living the life you were always meant to have, with the family you were always meant to know. My name is Viola Ashford, and for the first time in 32 years, I know exactly who I am.